that thank you. A lot of the principles that I'll be talking about today, I started learning about back then and put into practice within my own teaching, and am now happy to share with the faculty that I work with in their online and hybrid courses here at Tufts and Fletcher specifically. And Allie, your turn.
So hi, I'm Leigh. I'm also an instructional designer on the online and blended learning group. And I have been pretty much exclusively in online education through my whole professional life. Before I was at Tufts, I was a support engineer over at edX, doing large scale online learning with that team there. And right now I work with the fully online programs at Tufts, like the one of the concentrations for the public health masters online, and I'm currently working on development for an online MS in nutrition concentration.
Jen, if you wanted to go ahead. Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
I think Betsy, you're late doing this one, but I'll happily present
There we
it if you
go.
want me to take over.
So yeah, as instructional designers, one of the conversations we have most often with faculty is a reminder to go back to the learning outcomes and make sure that the changes that you're making to your courses over the years still keep tight alignment with that, while also being responsive to the changes in the discipline and that sort of thing. So in order to sort of keep ourselves centered, we thought we'd start with our objectives for today. So we're going to really be looking at some of the ways that learning science, and now some of these principles have been watered down just for the purposes of being able to discuss them easily. And so those of you who have a background in education, ed psych, sociology, you might see how we're sort of glossing over some of these, but I think that the most important piece is the big picture concepts so that you're able to go home and synthesize new ideas without getting lost in the weeds. And so that's sort of the goal here today. We're also going to be talking about some of the tools that you have available to you here at Tufts that are supported with great materials, with educational technologists, that sort of thing. So you should be able to walk out of here knowing which tools you might want to investigate for incorporation into your courses going forward, and some of the questions you might want to be asking yourself as you're going through that selection process, and where to find support about that. We'll also, like I said, be talking about a way to apply these learning principles in a context using technology as a support. And I think some of the examples that you'll see us using are things that, yes, you can use them in a fully remote environment where your students aren't all in the same place at the same time. But they can also be used extremely effectively to prepare students to engage more deeply in class, in a classroom environment. So those of you who are straddling the online versus in person and doing a little of both, or transitioning back and forth between one and another as colleagues go on sabbatical and leave and that sort of thing, I think that there'll be a lot here for those of you with a foot in both spaces. And yeah, we do welcome questions if you want to drop them in the chat. Sometimes it might take us a sec to answer, but we'd love to get to it. And Allie, if you want to jump in with our warm.
Yeah. So we said in the title of it that we want to include folks that are teaching hybrid online and in person, but we also want to get a sense of who is in the room right now to kind of tailor that. So if you could respond to the poll about what you're most interested in, I'll give folks a couple more seconds to put that in. Dang, y'all are speedy. Okay, so I'm gonna share these results out. And it looks like most folks are interested in in-person applications of stuff, which is very cool. We'll make a point of, when we go over things in the case study, to highlight stuff that could be useful in person as well. Okay, so then next, we're gonna pull up the chat, and if you could rack your brains, do a little retrieval, and share either a tool that you're currently using in teaching or a challenge that you're having. We're very curious about what additional ways that we can tailor this to help you guys.
I think we either have, oh, here we go. Somebody's trying, somebody loved Jamboard, but is no longer available. Oh, that's true, which is a challenge I'm facing in terms of finding a comparable tool. And I know, I think Betsy has Padlet as a discussion point later on, and that might be a place to look out for. Oh, we got Zoom whiteboards. Thanks, Freedom, for that suggestion.
In-class group work management is a very fun area to think about. Ooh, I love the collaborative Google Doc. I feel like that's a good opportunity for folks to like participate in ways that make sense to them and kind of collectively highlighting areas that more explanation might be helpful. Nice. Awesome. Thank you guys. That's a very good point to start from. Okay, so bringing it back to learning science principles, do not be scared of this list. We're going to be sending out a resource later that has little descriptions of all of these principles and some links to the research on there. Some of the stuff we did a deep dive into in the keynote earlier today, if y'all were in attendance to that. I know like they did a deep discussion of retrieval practice and testing effect and some metacognitive stuff that was going on. But when I think of learning sciences principles, I think of what we can do with this knowledge and areas that we can apply it. So there's some principles that relate to how we organize and present the content of our courses. I think of dual coding with that, where you're representing some information in multiple ways, or interleaving stuff on a Canvas module. So I go from reading something to listening to something to performing an activity. Some of these principles help us make the students' thinking visible. I think of concept maps with that. I think of scaffolding out assignments so students like can see when I'm writing my final paper, I need to come up with my topic, then my outline, then my draft, and things like that. And I also think of formative assessments in assignments that test understanding in ways leading up to something big and summative like a final exam. Some of these principles also deal with like idea generation and understanding, like jot recall and generation effect. And some, like the ones we talked about earlier today, deal with memory and reinforcing, like retrieval practice, distributed practice, and spaced repetition. And something to underscore there is that stuff that focuses on like facts and retrieval is still like an important building block of learning. I know we all want to be like at the highest order of thinking with having our students like explore and apply all of these things, but don't underscore or don't skip over the need for folks to like be retrieving information, drawing from bases of information, and like recalling the facts that they need to go on and be solving those complex problems. So there's a lot of stuff to play with these principles. But today, the case studies that we're going to go over talk about the principles on the right. So get excited. So I'm going to pass it over to Betsy to go into the first case study.
Yeah, so this first activity, I wanted to talk about it because there are so many ways to modify and customize it for your own specific teaching context. So this particular assignment was developed in partnership with an ed psych faculty member who was teaching a course for um, future school administrators in K-12. So these are working K-12 teachers. Some of them are principals or assistant principals already. Some of them run faculty development programs, but really they're going for the superintendent of schools positions, principal roles for larger schools, that sort of thing. So there was a really important aspect of that course that required deep discussion, interaction, consideration of sociological, cultural, psychological, political issues, and everything that students bring to class with them, and everything that these students needed to be aware of as school administrators that their students are bringing to class with them. So we created, this was a fully online class with no in-person discussion elements. So this was fully asynchronous, fully remote. Many of the students, even though they'd been going to school together for a year or more, had never met in person and were distributed all over the United States and the world in some cases. So we created a research and discuss activity. The course was focused on dealing with school crises and controversial situations. So it had a little bit of like marketing and communications and public relations. It had a little bit of policy and knowing what the rules are, what the laws are, and how they've been interpreted. So there were some discussion of cases and that sort of thing. So we took several really big issues that had been current in education at that time. And we asked students to research those issues in their desired teaching context or work context. So if they were already working in the district where they wanted to take a leadership role, they could do their research locally. If they were planning to relocate and be teachers at international schools and administrators at international schools, they could look at the countries that they were interested in moving to. So this was a way to allow our PhD candidates to become highly specialized into these areas. And I will say I have adapted this assignment for undergraduate students in an online environment as well. And I will speak to that in a moment. But in this particular case, we were working with graduate students, and it was very important that they had an understanding of how these issues are being communicated in the news media and how these issues, how they needed to be able to talk about them and to be able to use vocabulary that was, not going to inflame the conversation and make it worse. And how do we stay up on that? So that was also a really interesting offshoot of that, the arc of that discussion over that first semester we offered it. So students were assigned to go out and research a specific issue in their desired teaching context, come back, share the articles that they had found, and provide a sound summary explaining why they chose those materials, what was important about them, and then they could choose from a series of prompts that were the same every week to look at different aspects of the issue and how it was handled in that space. So it was a really exciting assignment. And these are just some of the, I think, learning principles that were present in that. And if we go to the next slide, let's see. Okay, so some of the tech tools that you could use to host a conversation of this nature are included here. And again, these different tools would shift the way the assignment is offered just a little bit. And so the secret sauce here is looking at the different ways that different skills are emphasized or automated so that students don't have to think about them and which parts of the process are important for your course. So yeah, you can use the Canvas discussion tool if the important part is, not necessarily students learning new tools to communicate, and it's really more about keeping it very simple. Let's say you have a lot of students, like we did in this program, who were on the Navajo reservation here in Arizona. And so we had students who were driving 150 miles to go park outside of a library to connect to the only free Wi-Fi that they had access to. So in those cases, we tried to focus the posts on using Canvas, using the tools that were the easiest with the lowest requirements for internet speed and access. That may be less of an issue here at Tufts, but I know that there are a lot of special programs where we are doing outreach all over the world, and we're reaching students with highly discrepant access to technology, support services, and that sort of thing. So I do mention the Canvas discussion tool, even though a lot of us are here because we want to figure out how to get out of the Canvas discussion tool and do something more interesting. But there are cases where that really is the best tool, and using text-driven communications is the best tool. In a case like this, we were able to share information by sharing articles, and we also had students who were able to, when students had trouble, sometimes we would compress the materials, but we started making sure that all the materials were compressed in as small a file size as possible. So Perusall and Hypothesis are two social annotation tools. So if the focus is on providing students with a text that they're all analyzing based on the future work context, they can still get that highly individualized information out of the assignment, but maybe they're looking at the same text and then seeing how their colleagues are responding based on the different contexts. That's a really helpful way to bring up different lenses that we may not have considered that are still relevant, even though maybe we didn't think of them first. And there's a really great article that our educational technologists have put together talking about which of the two tools to use. We have one that can be a little bit better for discussing issues, and another one that's a little bit better for direct textual analysis, like really taking a look at the vocabulary and the language and how things are discussed. So maybe like a literary context or translation. We also have Padlet, which would be a great way if you have students who are doing research on various niche topics around a sort of bigger one. And so sharing the resources that they find in the course of their research project can be really helpful. And so Padlet is a great place to gather resources and then be able to provide a small amount of contextualizing information about why those resources were gathered. And students can comment on each other's. These are also really great for some service learning applications, because some of those can include communicating student findings or information or research to the public. And this is one way that the tool is supported by Tufts, and it is also something that anyone can access without having to pay for an account. So when there is that bridge to serving the public or distributing information, or if you just want to share these resources for students within the discipline so that they constantly have an influx of new information in a hub, that's something that can live for multiple years and be added to over time. Then we have Bongo Learn, which can be great for interactive video. You can do interactive video assignments with the Canvas discussion tool. You can ask students to post a video or offer them the choice, which I think is a great option. They could do audio only, video only, text. They could also create images in some cases, like a concept map to explain a point. So you can either encourage or discourage students to use that stuff in the Canvas discussion tool, or you can move it into a tool that's designed to have video-based assignments where students are either commenting on the same video or all contributing. Let's see. So I kind of wanted to map out some of how you can get to some of these different learning principles, or how they are supported by this work. So if we do a research, report, discuss kind of activity that says, hey, why don't you research this issue, report back to the group, go read a few others, and then start some conversations with your colleagues, asking them questions in whichever discussion tool you're choosing at that point. So within the researching, students are, they're getting into the generation effect because they're having to decide what information is important. So there's some higher level stuff happening here with Bloom's taxonomy for those of you who like to look at your teaching through that lens. You have active learning because, again, they are seeking out the information, they are assembling it themselves, they're having to read through a variety of materials to make a decision about what's relevant and what's important. And in the conversations where people have been mentioning things like recall, I think that this is one of those moments where it really shows that expertise cannot, or AI can't beat expertise, right? You have to have some ability to use your discernment. And I think that key about discernment and information literacy is the thing I keep coming back to when we have conversations about that. So again, you're having students really have to be thoughtful and discerning about the materials that they're bringing in to their research. When you have them report out, they're doing first probably some sort of self-explanation because they need to understand it internally before they can jump to elaborative interrogation, which is going to be communicating information out and anticipating the kinds of questions that you might be asked about it in order to answer them as part of the way that you're explaining yourself. Again, that's really along the lines of peer teaching. It's kind of very similar to that, especially if there's going to be some back and forth Q&A as a part of that. And then with the discuss and interact, you've got your formative assessments where as you go, you're hearing directly from students about what they're interested in, whether or not they're correctly making connections between the materials and that you've provided in class and the research materials and situations that they're looking into. And that also creates those feedback loops. So, over time, especially if you're working with graduate students in an applied program or a capstone experience or some sort of project-based course, you're really able to have that 30,000-foot view of what your student demographic is interested in. What are they curious about? And are they curious about the right things? Because is there some conversation that needs to happen about here's what we know you need and here's what the data says that we need to be thinking about in the discipline, and here's what you said you wanted. And so sometimes some reconciliation there can be very important. And I think that these technology tools that we've talked about can really offer us opportunities to lean into different things that can really motivate our students. And then we can kind of start talking about designing prompts next. So you want to help students tie these things to something that's meaningful and important in their lives. So they have a good why for doing this work or doing the assignment in particular. So you want to help students tie it to themselves. An example of how this assignment can be used a little differently is from a sociology course where we developed a weekly discussion where we asked students to apply some of the information they were learning about to their own lives. And so this was done in a journal assignment that wasn't shared, but there was an aspect of the assignment where students could post anonymously and interact with each other. And that was heavily monitored, but it was with undergraduate students and it was in a fully remote asynchronous course with no live class meetings. And it actually went quite well. In that context, they were talking about incarceration and its impact as a sociology course, and they were talking about the impact of incarceration on families. So there had been a period where they covered policy, a lot of the data for outcomes, recidivism, all of the issues that kind of go along with that. But I think the faculty member really wanted the students to understand how deeply this experience can ripple through a person's life. So she had the students look at their own life and financial situation. And the question was, if the primary earner in your household was incarcerated, whether they did it or not is irrelevant. This is the reality that you're in. How would that impact your life? So the students first journaled privately, not without other students seeing it. And then they had a chance to post anonymously. And so the posts were moderated before they were put up. And then they had a discussion about it after that in asynchronously in a separate discussion a week later. So they made the initial posts with no comments and no responses. So students could read the whole thing, let it percolate for a week. Then there was a new discussion the following week where students could talk about the things that they'd read and how that they had interpreted. And it was one of the most powerful discussions I think I've seen in a 100 level course. It was really, really beautiful to watch. And the faculty member did end up doing some presentations at conferences around that. So again, I think that drawing it back to the relevance, and if we can go to the next slide, then choosing the right technologies, and then also taking a look at how we ground it in the meaningful parts of the discipline so students can really lean into it. So another way to do it is to really look at authentic materials, which is something that comes a lot out of those of you who might be language teachers. This is a huge one. You know, it's not really necessarily helpful for a university student to read, grade school primers like Dick and Jane or, See Spot Run. It's going to be a lot easier for them to maybe analyze a meme or text messages or something along those lines. Now, in the discipline, it's going to be like, okay, so what do the reports look like that sociologists might get from the state working with, for example, Child Protective Services? How do they analyze that, and how does that inform their day-to-day work? So taking a look at, okay, this is what the data is happening nationally, and how do I take that to work with me? How does that inform the decisions that I make? Knowing that this outcome is more likely with this intervention, is this the right one? And so getting students to ask those questions early on, I think, can be really helpful. And again, touching back on the peer teaching, if you're having them apply it to a specific situation, if you're getting feedback loops because you're hearing what students are interested in, they're bringing in their own situations, their own cases, their own contexts. And I think that is where we can really get some powerful stuff happening. And then the next one. Also, another consideration when you're designing your prompt is how you're communicating your expectations to students. I'm highlighting these 3 PDFs from the Transparency in Teaching, or in Learning and Teaching, TILT. It's a really wonderful, massive research project where any faculty can participate if you're interested. And they provide a really clear layout for how you would communicate your expectations to students. And it has a variety of benefits. Transparency is a leveler of playing fields. Using this process can help reduce unconscious bias, help us really communicate clearly to accreditation bodies how we are working with our students. And we can also provide consistency that allows students to spend less time worrying about what the requirements are and being concerned about whether or not they are interpreting them correctly, and more time on task, engaging with the course materials, thinking about the content. So again, this sort of reduces the amount of time students have to spend intuiting what's required when it's really transparently presented. And this looks like a lot of paperwork, but the questions that are on the first 2 documents on the left, I think, are really helpful reflection questions, whether or not you're doing any writing. If you just take a few minutes and ask yourself some of these questions, I think it can really help to identify some solutions to common teaching problems. And then the other piece is to, when you're designing your instructions, to make sure that they're consistently presented throughout the term. So if we could jump to the next one. This is an example of how I've interpreted the TILT framework in the past, and these are the headings that I use on the assignments that I design when I'm the one who's teaching. So I do some context, the overview and purpose of the assignment, how it fits into the course, why are we doing it, how does it align with the learning outcomes, what are we practicing, what are we reviewing, where are we likely to struggle. Then some step-by-step process-based instructions. What are students going to need to do to consider for the assignment to be considered complete? How are different parts of the assignment weighted? Grading criteria, so a rubric, a list, a checklist with point values associated with it, so students understand the weighting and importance of different activities. And then something that I add that TILT doesn't really talk about is I like to add to my syllabus and to most of my assignments an integrity statement that explains to students how I show my academic integrity in the classroom and in my grading. So we know that we really expect our students to engage ethically with their work. But also, when I'm able to be clear about the fact that these grading criteria are also here to protect you from my bias. When I make decisions about how I'm going to grade things before I grade them, it's less likely to be informed by any of the work I haven't done yet on my own biases, right? So it's a way of helping students understand that if they write a paper that, based on what they're able to intuit about me, is probably completely the opposite of the way that I feel about that issue, they can do that confidently and knowing that their grade isn't going to tank because I don't like what they said. I can show them this is how I assign points. And do you see here, it doesn't say anything about how well I agree with it. It's everything to do with how well you convey your ideas and defend them. So this has been a really great tool for talking about AI, because I'll ask students questions. Are you going to be happy if all of your feedback on all the papers you write this term is generated by AI and I really didn't even read it? And they're going to be like, oh, the students really have a visceral response to that sort of question when you really flip it on their head. And so I have started, this is the thing I've probably been doing for the last 10 years or so to address different issues in the classroom. I was teaching a lot of courses where most of my students were non-native English speakers from all over the world. And so making sure that I was clear about what I thought academic integrity meant was far more important than it would be in an other teaching context. And so it was something that I brought to my teaching that I've kept and really appreciate. So how can a student be ethical? Are they allowed to do that online quiz with their friends? Is that open book? That kind of thing. So here you can talk about how to use personal experience in an appropriate way, how to tie that to the research, and what types of materials are acceptable and not. And I think that can be really helpful. Also, this is where I would put information to contact a librarian if that's needed, that sort of thing. Okay, so that is most of what I wanted to talk about with this assignment, and I'd be happy to answer some questions at the end with our Q&A, but I've been talking for a long time, so I'm going to go ahead and stop now. And if you want to ask questions in the chat that can't wait until after, I will keep an eye on the chat while my colleagues are talking. And so I'm going to pass it off.
Thanks, Betsy. That was awesome. All right, so I will be presenting about simulations today. Simulations can be a powerful teaching tool, providing students with a safe space to practice the skills that they'll use in their professional lives, and giving educators an authentic means to evaluate student understanding of key concepts. The example I'll be discussing today is based on simulation activities used in Professors Diana Chigas and Eileen Babbitt's negotiation courses at Fletcher. And a note about that, they teach it starts out fully asynchronous with their GMAT program and then has an in-person residency, but they also use these same tools I'm going to be talking about today with their fully in-person courses. So we've seen this be used across modalities, which is really cool. So as I was just kind of explaining, these principles and tech tools here could be applied to a wide variety of learning activities, not just simulations. And hopefully those of you who aren't working necessarily in an async or hybrid or online modality will be able to take away from this as well. One of my favorite aspects of the simulations that Professors Chigas and Babbitt have designed is their scaffolded approach. Starting with a fully asynchronous modality, students review pre-recorded lectures and reading materials centered on various negotiation strategies and concepts before completing a few practice scenarios. For these formative assessments, students are assigned negotiating roles and paired with a classmate representing the opposing party. The students review their party's confidential details before meeting one-on-one in Zoom or MS Teams to negotiate, recording the process to later share with their instructors. Professors Chigas and Babbitt review those recordings, provide feedback, and encourage students to reflect on their experience before moving on to another practice simulation with a new scenario and partner. These practice opportunities help students to build their skills and confidence through multiple formative assessments, preparing them for the summative assessment and in-person simulation with the entire class. And for those of you who were on the call for the keynote earlier, one of the big topics of the day was helping students to feel more comfortable about that concept of not knowing, and scaffolding and providing formative assessments that lead to a more high stakes summative assessment is a great way to help provide that support and comfort that students today are seeking. Professors Chigas and Babbitt's approach to simulation activities is an excellent example of a constructivist learning method, as it provides students with realistic experiences that build on their prior knowledge and actively engage them through collaboration, role play, and reflection. To effectively support these simulation activities, Professors Chigas and Babbitt use several EdTech tools and Canvas features. I'll be focusing primarily on Canvas sections and groups today, but for those of you who'd like additional information about Zoom or MS Teams and how they were used, feel free to reach out with questions. Regarding VoiceThread, this was a tool that was considered for the negotiation simulations, but since students only needed to share their recordings with the instructors for feedback, Canvas assignments were sufficient and didn't require the students to learn an additional tool. Had the students been asked to share their recordings with the entire class for feedback, VoiceThread or Canvas discussion boards would have made great platforms. For an activity like this simulation, details need to be shared with specific student groups that couldn't be accessed by anyone representing the opposing party. While this could be achieved through email, Canvas sections allows instructors to easily create and track course content like announcements, pages, and assignments that can only be accessed by specific students without needing to assign each student individually and on a repeated basis. Although this case study used sections to provide negotiation role materials, again, this feature could be used for a myriad of purposes. The important piece to remember is that you have to create your sections on the settings page first before you can assign students to those roles or designate specific Canvas items to those sections. When adding users to multiple sections, everyone enrolled can see those assigned sections on the People page. Students will also receive notifications about their section assignments, so name your sections thoughtfully. Every person in the course should be assigned to the umbrella course section, which is listed as that Canvas course code, but only students needing access to the specific course content, the negotiating materials in this case, should be assigned to your manually created sections. Once sections have been created, you can configure pages, assignments, and any other content where you see that assign to or post to option. If you don't want all students enrolled in the course to access those materials, make sure you remove the everyone label from that assign to field before you publish them. Otherwise, they'll still have access to them. With this simulation example, Canvas groups were also used as a way to create the student pairings for each negotiation scenario. So these course groups can be used to create a Canvas assignment where one member from each pair can submit their recording on behalf of the team, and then the instructors can provide feedback and grades for both students simultaneously. Groups and group sets can be managed from the People page in Canvas under the Groups tab. In addition to setting up group assignments, these can be used for communicating and sharing documents with specific groups of students. And students can even create their own Canvas groups for studying, sharing files, or working on other small group activities. So I'm wrapping up with kind of some ideas here as far as how these can be applied. I've listed them kind of in terms of online hybrid versus fully in person, but in some these could easily be adjusted and used on either side depending as your needs. If you feel like you've got some ideas of maybe how you might want to use these in your own courses, feel free to throw them in the chat. Similar to what Betsy said, I'm happy to answer during our Q&A questions if you have specific questions about Professors Chigas and Babbitt's simulation, how they run it, how it differs from their fully online course versus their kind of in-person experience, which I don't support, but I know a little bit about that experience from my work with them on GMAP. And do know that all the links that you saw in these slides go to various documents that the ETS team have put together for each of these tools, which are awesome. And like we said, we will be sharing these out later, so you'll be able to click on those and explore. So that being said, I'm going to move us into the discussion portion of today's presentation. And we have a couple of topics that we're going to be discussing. I know Allie mentioned she was going to put them, there they are. She got them, thank you. Before we do that and jump into the discussion, I do want to point out that there is a worksheet that we put together today, offering it in couple of different modalities, designed it in Google Slides, but recognize that not everyone is a big fan of Google. So there is a PowerPoint version and a PDF file that you'll also have access to. But the Google Slide doc, if you open that, it'll ask you to make a copy. You do need to be logged into your Google account to do it. And then once that copy is generated, it'll bring you to this 4-page slide doc. We've broken the activity down into 4 steps here. So thinking about, what we're, our discussion topic for today, what's a learning activity or classroom challenge that you're facing. Maybe you've got a long list of them. Feel free to put them in there. You can certainly take from our examples and drag them where they belong, or you can type away to your heart's content. And then once you've had a chance to kind of brainstorm a little bit, you can use step 2 to focus on 1 to kind of bring to an action plan. And again, if you don't have that today, that's not a big deal. You can have this document and use it over and over and over again, or make your own version of it. Once you've got that kind of thinking backwards design here, what's the problem? What's the challenge that we want to solve or resolve? Now we'll start thinking about the EdTech tools. I always say to faculty, let your objectives, your outcomes be the driving force as to what you need in terms of an EdTech tool. Don't just introduce an EdTech tool for the sake of using an EdTech tool. And again, these all link to some great ETS user guides for each of them. And then there's also a link to the full page of user guides here for those of you who aren't familiar with it. But again, think about tools that you know really well. And, if you're really good with discussion boards, you can throw that in the really know well. If you're not at all familiar with VoiceThread, this would be a tool that you need more, support with, need a training perhaps, you can throw them down there. And, with Google, you can certainly create a text box and add your own. And then finally, the action plan itself, once you've kind of identified what's that problem, what are the steps for you to implement the solution using the EdTech tool that you've chosen. So kind of got a map that's been kind of set up for you here in this table here. Feel free to customize as you need, and know that Tufts has many resources between the entire ETS cohort to support you with learning any new tools that you might want to learn about. So that being said, I'm gonna let Allie and Betsy also join me in the unmute world here for the plans for the discussion. I know we're talking a bunch today. Oops. Well, we can, sorry, did not mean to click yet. Go back. Thank you for adding those links. Oh, we got something in the PowerPoint. Thank you, Allie. Feel free to jump in with questions at this point too. Don't feel like you're tied to one of these topics. Awesome, James, go right ahead.
Hello, thank you for this presentation. It was very helpful. So kind of questions 1 and 2, I'm both tackling a little bit. I have tried a kind of version of the simulation before in a class, working a little bit differently and honestly with far less technology. It's been a few years, but it worked pretty well. But I think after seeing the example you give here of how to use it kind of in conjunction with technology in the classroom, it looks really helpful, and like I could probably do it in a much better way than I did it years ago. So I'm definitely interested in exploring that more in the hopefully near future. I have a course next semester, so we'll see.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I'm curious if you don't mind sharing what sort of simulation is yours. I know the example I shared was specific to negotiations.
It's not dissimilar. It was the one that I had done before was essentially about negotiations between nation states. Um, the class I'm running next semester is a dialogic course, so I would probably change it to be something along the lines of dialogue, but not sure yet.
Fun. Well, I will tell you, I was actually talking to Diana Chigas last night, and she was saying about the differences between her in-person teaching with the with Canvas sections. You know, she's actually got to the point where she's very good about setting them up on her own, so she can do them for her in-person course self. But she finds that the in-person students have a little bit harder time finding the materials that they need for themselves as a result. So it's one of those things where it might be helpful to post, even though not all students will have access to the ending page when they click on the link, but giving them like an announcement with with both links if it's like two opposing sides, just so that they can easily find those materials if they're not used to necessarily working with Canvas on a regular basis, like maybe like an online or hybrid student might be.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking or speaking up. I know we have about 9 minutes left in the session just to make sure everyone's aware of time. But really, if any questions or you want to share other experiences that you've tried, or again, that idea of not knowing, the big theme of the day, you know, is there something that you maybe, is there an obstacle in your path that's the reason why, you know, we're here to support you. So hopefully you can leave today's workshop with at least knowing that there's support out there for you. Oh, and Freedom, thank you for putting your EdTech email in the chat there so folks didn't see that. Definitely the EdTech team, fantastic folks. All the tools that we didn't even talk about today, they have all the knowledge.
Can I ask a question about laptop usage?
Sure. I don't know if I'll be able to help, but let's
I
hear.
know this is kind of random. Yeah, I think I like kind of alluded to this in the chat earlier. I know laptops are necessary for accessibility purposes, but I often find that students just kind of meander and they like, do online shopping and do whatever during class. And it's really a challenge when they're in person. And I'm like, are you actually in person? Physically, yes, mentally, no. So how does one kind of co-opt these tools to bring them back to a level of engagement? Or is this something that like I need to focus on elsewhere that's maybe outside the scope of this workshop?
Oh, no, please. Student engagement, I think, is a huge piece of all of what we're covering today. So, and I mean, that's the crux of what you're talking about here, whether
Yeah.
it's laptop or a cell phone or whatever. So, I can see in the chat, other folks are mirroring your concern here. So, Betsy, I saw you on mute. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things that one of my many adventures in teaching is that I taught a course for students who ended up on academic probation after their first semester of university coursework. And they were not happy to be in my class most of the time. So, I kind of had a big battle in front of me to get everyone sort of on board. I mean, I probably shouldn't contextualize it as a battle, but it was a big challenge to sort of call my students in. And these were students who were using strategies that weren't necessarily effective for them. So yeah, we saw a lot of laptops open in those classes. And so it's a very small study, and honestly, it's not really so powerful in terms of what it means in academia. I think the N was too small. There's lots of ways to critique the study, but I do think it offers an interesting perspective. And really, I think a lot of people have used it to say laptops are bad and we shouldn't use them in class. But essentially, what we could see from that study is that when we put ourselves in a mindset, and our students do this, of the words that are coming in are coming directly out of our fingers, and we're not doing any analysis, we're not doing any evaluation, we're not considering the weight and value of those words. And we're literally typing in every hedge, pause, that sort of thing. We're not thinking about the words that are being said. And so, yes, maybe we have something great to come back to later that's an archaeological record of what happened in that class, but it's actually not going to give us the connections that we need to make in order to absorb and make that information stick, right? So what I think can be really helpful, and I think that we can get this idea from a lot of the STEM courses that have labs, where you have a workbook or a lab manual that takes you step by step through the process. What's important? Where do you need to get a calculation? Where are you getting the information used to do the calculation? Which formula are we using? Why are we using it? That sort of thing. It can be really helpful as you're generating your slides. For example, if you use lecture slides in your class to sort of, like guide the activity, even if it's not just bullet points, even if it's just saying this is what we're doing right now, building into some of that what students could be doing on their laptop during class to get the most out of the lecture. So what sort of not extracurricular, but paracurricular activities can they be doing during your lecture that's going to keep them connected? So that can look like something that I think previously may have not really considered, because it feels a little bit like that idea of spoon feeding, which I think we need to be careful about, that kind of language. But providing a series of guided questions throughout the lecture for students to answer as they go, so that if they really do feel like they need to have the laptop out, or maybe they have handwriting that is so illegible when they're writing quickly that it's not useful later. So yeah, there are lots of good reasons that people would want to use laptops, and I think that we can just call it in the same way that we've had managed cell phone use in class by incorporating tools like Poll Everywhere. Like they're going to have them out. You might as well try to keep them focused on the right things while they're on that device. So I think there are other ways to do that. I used to give all of my exams in class with students bringing their own laptops, so that I could be there to answer questions, that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of great ways to use it. We do know that when it's just words coming in our ears and out our fingers, students are not learning. So I think that one of the goals could just be giving students something productive and on target to be doing during that. I don't know, does anyone have any questions about that? I'm not sure if that fully addressed the question.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Like, and I tried to deconstruct that by like giving them something pair shares, or I get them up and moving, because it's like, I mean, I'm using my class as an example because it was once a week, 2.5 hours, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be painful, So like I tried to break that a little bit, but I think it was still like a habit that kind of plagued the semester. So I was just kind of, scratching my head in terms of what to do to kind of circumvent that.
Yeah, and I think with the think, pair, share stuff, this is one of those ways that we can use the online tools to prepare students to engage effectively in class.
Yeah.
I like think, pair, share because it's a great equalizer. It can help to moderate the extrovert voices that kind of just say something without really having thought it through first, because they can think of words. And then we also have our introverts who really need to process something for a long time before they're going to be ready to discuss it or offer the idea to the entire class. So having activities at home where students are pre-reflecting, it's so easy to think about this in terms of scaffolding our writing activities. You do a journal, activity every week. And then at the end of the unit, you might write a reflection paper that sort of pulls together the themes and thoughts from your journal. And then you use those papers to sort of formulate your research question later on. So we understand how that arc can work in a semester, but we rarely think about our in-class discussions as an activity that should be scaffolded. A lot of students look to their laptops for support because they're afraid they're going to get it wrong, especially our non-native speakers. Half the time they're looking up words and to make sure that they're pronouncing it correctly. If they have a question, they want to sound coherent. It's, you know, I think that there are a lot of ways that we can help students come to class feeling confident enough to not rely on their tech tools as a sort of comfort thing. So yes, scaffolding that. So asking students to reflect in a journal entry before they come to class, ask them to do an oral journal, you know, like answer a couple questions in a video if they're not comfortable writing, or offer the choice. So I think, yeah, I think calling folks in and helping the students focus in on the activities that are going to help them feel comfortable enough to do the deep dive thinking and critical thinking and synthesis that you're looking for. And I think we have 1 minute, or oh, sorry, yeah, we just finished.
I know, that's why I put the conclusion side. So, I mean, I don't have a meet. I gave myself a little padding after this. So if anyone wants to stay on a little bit to ask other questions, I'm happy to try and do that. But thank you all for coming. Thank you guys, Betsy and Allie, for your presentations and information today.
Yeah, appreciated all the questions and examples that folks shared in the chat and verbally. That was really great.
Yes, thank you all for joining us and for coming to the whole symposium. This was great. I'm going to stop sharing.